According to an ancient Iroquois legend, the gradual fading of eternal power and light in the cosmos made it necessary for the formation and the activity of a creator God whose task was, for the sake of the whole universe, to bring into being Earth and all its creatures. His name in the Onondaga language was De Huayako, which means he grasps the sky with both hands. And in the legend, he represents the power to remember one's higher identity in the midst of the action of the world. He has, however, a twin brother who declares, "I am not thinking about the place where I came from. It is sufficient that my mind is satisfied in having arrived at this place. This place will become exceedingly delightful and amusing to the mind. I trust in the thing which my father gave me, a flint arrow, by which I have speech. This I will use perhaps to defend myself, so that I will not think of the other place." His name is Ohio, which means he who is crystal ice, he who is flint, subsequently referred to as flint. He represents evil in the form of forgetfulness, intentional forgetfulness of the higher identity. That was from Ian McGilchrist's amazing new book. If you haven't read it, someone described it as the most important book of the last 100 years. Which had just come out, and Ian McGilchrist was on the panel on one of the events at the Wheeler Opera House. Some of you may have seen that event that they did a while ago. And the book that he wrote is called The Matter with Things. It's 2 volumes, and they're that thick, so I just warn you. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to be looking at that relationship between he who grasps the sky with both hands and he who is crystal ice, he who is flint. Because they both represent the inner and outer way that we navigate our way through life. I'm going to be looking at how we navigate our way through life. How do we hold on to that thread that William Stafford refers to in the poem that Amy read? You know, we're going through life, and suddenly things happen that we don't expect. And we often doubt the path we're taking. You know, am I holding the right thread? Am I going the right way? And then we have things that we expect will happen. Yeah, it's all going to happen. I won't mention the Ryder Cup. And suddenly, we are tempted into doubt of the path that we're on at the moment. But if we hold on to that golden thread, we're not swayed one way or the other. And you can see what I'm going to suggest is that there is a way to navigate through life, which is holding on to that golden thread, because we've got the thread. And there's a similarity between these two relations. I always think, here at the chapel, we have, all the wisdom traditions. They're so similar. So that is a, indigenous wisdom tradition. And the relationship between he who grasps the sky with both hands and flint is also in the Hindu scripture, the Upanishads. And some of you will recognize this reading, but it's the same sort of thing. Like 2 birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the immortal self are perched on the branches of the safe same tree. The former tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree. The latter, tasting of neither, calmly observes. The individual self, deluded by forgetfulness, notice that word forgetfulness was in the previous reading, of his identity with the divine self, bewildered by his ego, grieves and is sad. But when he recognizes the worshipful Lord of his own true self and beholds his glory, he grieves no more. Seeing him present in all, the wise man is humble. Seeing him present in all, the wise man is humble. Puts not himself forward. He delights in the self. His joy is in the self, and he serves the Lord of all. Both these readings mirror the inner and the outer forces that demand our attention as we navigate our way through life. And I've got the icon up here today because, again, you know, the inner life, you've got the gold, which represents the divine, and the red represents the flesh, and then the dark represents the unconscious. And there is this struggle between all of that is going on, between the flesh and the unconscious and the divine as well. And we have that as we go through our lives. We wonder, am I doing the right thing? You know, how should I be responding to those situations that I'm going through? Our inner promptings that seem to say we should go one way. And this, you know, we should be calm and, you know, nice and kind and good and all that. And then we have the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that loudly demand that we pay attention to what is right in front of us and deal with that. But you know, it's not about choosing one or the other. It's not about choosing one or the other. Francis Bacon says, the universe is not to be narrowed down to the limits of understanding, which has been man's practice up to now. But, and this is the key thing, Bacon says, understanding must be stretched and enlarged to take in the image of the universe as it is discovered. As we discover what's going on, we need to expand our understanding in working out how to respond to what comes our way. It's not an either-or situation, but a both-and. And to have that both-and, our understanding has to expand and include everything. There are more things on heaven than earth, Horatio Shakespeare said, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. We have to get that we have to broaden our understanding to include everything. You know, Jesus condemned the Pharisees for either or thinking. He says, to what then can I compare this generation? What are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace, calling out to each other. We played the pipe for you and you didn't dance. You know, it's expectation. We sang a dirge and you didn't cry. You're not responding to what we're asking you to do. For John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking wine, and you said to him, he's a demon. And the Son of Man came eating and drinking. You said, here's a drunken and a glutton, a friend of tax collectors, of sinners. And then the key line, but wisdom is proved right by her children. Wisdom is proved right by her children. We always say here at the chapel, what we're trying to do is to learn together how to live life more skillfully. And one of the ways we do that is by paying attention to what works, paying attention to how we actually find ourselves in that place where we're following that. We have to work out the seeming dichotomy between doing what seems expedient. And, you know, people, you know, in this country trying to work out, you know, do I do what's expedient or doing what presents the values of the truth that's within us all? And the key thing is that both these come from the same source. Both the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and also our inner promptings, they come from the same source. The prompting from within and the circumstances. And we have to love and accept and include both. It says in the Collect for Purity that Heather actually read today, come and cleanse the thoughts of my heart with the inspiration of your Holy Spirit. May my thinking be clear, that I may perfectly love you and worthily magnify your holy name. That I may perfectly love you. That I may accept the circumstances I find myself in and therefore perfectly love the order that has brought all this about. And worthily magnify your holy name. And may I be an instrument of your peace in the still small voice that is within me. That's what we're trying to do. Become an instrument of that as we relate to what is going on in the world. You know, that famous quote from Thomas Merton. God utters me like a word containing a partial thought of himself. A word will never be able to comprehend the voice that utters it. But if I'm true to the concept that God utters in me, if I'm true to the thought of him that I'm meant to embody, I shall be full of his actuality and find him everywhere in myself and find myself nowhere, those two selves again. I shall be lost in him. That is, I shall find myself. I shall be saved. To follow that thread is to navigate both the inner and the outer, like watching the wind when you're sailing and the currents as well at the same time, the wind and the currents, to find the sweet spot. We're sailing through life, the thread that guides us. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it does not change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt and die, you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do to stop time's unfolding, but you never let go of the thread. So the key question is, how do you find that thread that guides you among things that change, that shows how to relate to both the inner and the outer? Marcus Aurelius, in his meditation, says, what I do, I attribute to human beneficence. What is done to me, I accept it and attribute it to the gods and that source from which all things flow. What you're doing and what you're done to, you accept both. Sometimes we find ourselves following a thread. We think, this is the way to go. And we find ourselves at a dead end. And we think, well, I thought I was, how is it all happening like this? We cast around for another thread. But that thread that we're talking about is the golden thread. That is the thread that is really at the center of our lives. And once we find that thread, we stick onto it and it'll lead us through whatever life brings us. That famous quote from James Finney who says that God protects us from nothing. And we all feel that, really. But God enables us. God gives us everything we need for everything that happens to us. We are looked after in ourselves. We're given all the resources that we need, but not protected, but given the resources to deal with what comes our way. And I think that the thread is not so much, it's not so much an occupation or a way of doing, it's more a way of being. We're trimming those sails, and once we get it right, it'll take us on our journey through life. And it's all about balance. And a while ago I mentioned that, I mentioned lots of times before, that T.S. Eliot concept of the still point. At the still point in the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, boom, that's the thread. There the dance is. But neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered. Neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent or descent, except for the point, the still point. And the idea of the thread is finding that still point in our lives. And I think we have to find that balance in our lives. And when we find it, we then have to keep the balance. And in discovering the balance, we have to be aware, of the winds and the weather, which try and take us off that balance. We have to be aware of everything, the circumstances, our own personal talents, how our friends and family affect us, the nature of our environment, our position in the world. We have to take all that into consideration and then trim our sails accordingly to find that sweet spot, to keep onto that thread, because there is the thread. And I think that requires a lot of self-consciousness, being aware of ourselves in relation to everything else. It's called the golden thread because there's an aspect of alchemy about the process. We're taking the base metal of our lives and transforming it into gold. Finding and following that thread is to create something wonderful, to be in touch with the divine. Because like a string that's in tune, when we follow the golden thread, it becomes a transforming influence on all those who are around us. It's almost as if our contribution in life is just to find that thread and then to stay with it. Because it is the thread that leads us. And we ourselves have to get out of the way. Those two aspects. We have to get out of the way. And it's when we think we know, that's when we get into trouble. When we think we know the right way, but we're not feeling that thread. And the trick is to find that sweet spot and then let it take us home. Like Theseus in the Minotaur, following that ribbon that had been left out and was able to take him home. In our lives, we find that way home by following the thread that's been laid out for us. And I can remember, it does take time. I can remember in my own life, coming from a single parent adds to one's difficulty, I find myself going off, a bit like the prodigal son, a few blind alleys. I didn't end up eating corn that the pigs were made for, but I did end up in a few blind alleys. I tried, advertising and broadcasting, both of which were, very attractive and didn't satisfy, and gradually began to narrow myself down. And I didn't like religion. Didn't really seem a good idea, but there was something in it that I felt safe with, and I recognized that. There was a safety in it. And when you added spirituality to that, I started to feel myself in the ballpark. But it wasn't really about the activity of it. Even when I got myself involved in spirituality and religion, I was still fundamentally dysfunctional in my life, If I was an open book, I wouldn't have been proud of it. But I was doing the religious bit, but, all the other stuff. And it wasn't really until I committed myself to a practice, a meditation practice for me, that I began to find that thread and follow it. Following your breath, not letting the mind distract, is all a part of finding that thread. But as I said, it's different for each one of us. And we all have different threads in our lives. And I think a key thing in terms of navigating is not to do what other people tell you that you ought to do, but to follow your own thread. So many religions, they say, well, this is the thread, follow this and you'll be okay. And you're not. And it ends badly most of the time. Here's a guru, I'll follow this. It always ends badly, it's difficult, So, when you follow their thread and not your own, it doesn't lead, to transformation. It leads to slavery. It's another dead end. I mean, I don't even follow the rules in my own practice. I mean, you're supposed to meditate twice a day. I don't. You're supposed to meditate every day. I don't. I meditate, once a day, and I don't meditate on Fridays and Saturdays because it's my day off, And I found myself, and it works for me. It's a sort of balancing act of how to do that. And if you find your own balance or sweet spot or still point in the turning world, that's what you have to do. And if you're feeling that the balance isn't there, I'm on my last page, so you can start to feel that. So it's about finding that balance, but really finding the golden thread in your life to navigate. It is the only game in town. Everything else is just going through life unconsciously. You can be wonderfully successful, but if you haven't found that thread, it's so much water under the bridge, and it makes no difference. But find that thread, and even if you are a humble cotton spinner like Gandhi, you can transform the world. Because you're on a path that's meant for you. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing rather than simply doing what pleases you. And all of that has consequences, both for you and for the people around you. You can imagine the effect it has when people who are following that thread and find themselves weaving threads with other people together. You begin to weave something together. When you've got your thread and you've got your thread and you're working together, a tapestry begins to happen. And it's at that point where we begin to weave the kingdom of heaven. It's by us following our threads and weaving it together and working together that we weave the kingdom of heaven. And in fact, if you look at it, just religious terms, you could say that the second coming is that moment where all of us in the world find our threads and begin to weave together a seamless garment of interconnectedness. That's when everything comes together and expresses itself in one. But you can't engineer that. Because the moment you do, you end up looking from your thread and not following it. You're in your head and not your thread. You're just trying to work out what to do. All this is very reminiscent of Meister Eckhart, 13th century philosopher. He said the meditative state was, when you're in the meditative state, you're wanting for nothing, willing nothing, and knowing nothing. Wanting for nothing, nothing you want for. You're not willing, making things happen, and you're knowing nothing. You're just following your thread. And how do you recognize that you're following the thread? That's the key thing. How do you recognize it? Well, certainly not from the fact that everything's going right, because that just doesn't happen. And what you're following there is desired outcomes, and that is definitely not following your thread. What you can use to recognize the thread is a peace in your heart. That's where you recognize the still point. It's the peace in your heart, the fact that you can feel a rightness and an understanding that creates peace. And that, of course, is the peace that passes all understanding that's mentioned in the blessing every week. That peace that passes all understanding. And it's this peace, and becoming, as St. Francis put it, a channel of peace in the world, that through doing that, we pass on that thread to others. And next week, I'll talk more about that, creating that channel as we go through our lives. Thank you, Mac. And we always have a chance for you to come back at us from what's been said. We always offer things with a willingness to be wrong. Sometimes we do have people want to share. Sometimes it just be a moment of silence. But does anybody feel moved to share anything? Or yes, I'll come to you. Yes.
So, not sure if you saw it the other day, but apparently the rapture was supposed to happen on September 23rd or 24th. And so that was the end of the world.
Well, it did, I think. We were the ones left behind, really. That's the trouble. It did happen, it just didn't tell anybody.
No, so just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No. I would say watch The Leftovers. It's one of the best shows on HBO about the rapture. That's great. Okay. Right, yes, Aggie, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to say that sure everybody was moved by the Charlie Kirk situation. And I've always had God in my heart on such a high level. But I think what's really stood out for me and what I'm trying to pass along every day now is that we have to be kind to each other. And we have to look beyond our opinions. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. Respect each other's opinions. You don't have to agree with them. But let's be kind and loving, because I think that's what God would like, and that's what Jesus was.
Aggie, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I always felt the Dalai Lama said, my religion is kindness. I think that's absolutely right. Good. Anybody else want to say anything? So, we're going to have our offertory now, which is great. Thank you very much. Did you want to say anything at all?
Oh, you saw it in my face, didn't you, just then? Oh, I was about to let it go.
I didn't say you were pregnant, but that wouldn't be the right thing to say. 2 kids in college. Anyway, yes,
I just wanted to reiterate what you said about peace and joy. I just think that if we don't know, if we can't figure out our thread, that really identifying peace and joy, that is just such a reliable guide.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's great. That's it.